Many of you might not recognize this face, but I will promise you, if you're even remotely, somewhat partially interested in the paranormal slash ufology, you will most definitely recognize one of his most iconic and famous photos he ever took. And that, of course, is this famous picture most people remember from the X-Files. And it's actually right here to my right in my studio right now as well. But that picture was taken by this man. Who is he? He is Billy Meier, and that's who we're going to be talking about today. And there's lots to say about the Billy Meier case, but we will get step by step, go through all of it. Hopefully, you will gain a better understanding, and then whether you believe it or not, that's totally up to you to decide. I have my opinion, which I'm going to share with you here on this episode of Too Boldly Pod. But there's one thing about Billy Meier. He is very divisive, specifically within ufology. I will say this before we get into it. Most, if not all, professional or skeptical type people immediately discount Billy Meier. What do I think? Well, we're going to learn about what I think as time goes on throughout this podcast. But I did pull a couple of TikTok videos to sort of help guide us through this entire story of one Billy Meier.
On March 18, 1975, a Swiss farmer by the name of Billy Meier was reportedly visited by extraterrestrial beings.
Now, one thing this particular stitch that I got doesn't tell you is they make it sound like it started in 1975. According to Meier, kind of sort of after the fact, it started way back in the 1940s when he was just a little boy.
He claimed to have been visited by a group of beings from the Pleiades star cluster, and that he captured photographic evidence of their presence. One of the resulting images, allegedly taken by Meier, depicts a saucer-shaped craft hovering above a hilly, forested area of Switzerland.
Now, you will notice that that picture is different from the I Want to Believe picture that I just showed you. And originally in the X-Files, this picture you see right here is what Fox Mulder had in his office, but Billy Meier kind of sort of threatened to sue Fox for unauthorized usage. So they basically just switched the background to what you see now in the picture that I showed you earlier. That kind of took away from any chance of them getting sued by Billy Meier.
This image quickly gained notoriety and became one of the most iconic images in the field of ufology. Despite the widespread attention that Meier's images have garnered, many skeptics dismiss his claims as nothing more than hoaxes, while others argue their authenticity. However, the enduring popularity of Meier's 1975 image cannot be denied. It has been featured in countless books, documentaries, and even on the iconic I Want to Believe poster for the hit TV series The X-Files. Much like any UFO photo, the authenticity of Meier's imagery has been long debated for decades. Throughout his life, he made several claims of regular communication with extraterrestrials.
And we're going to get into that whole portion when we watch the next Stitched video, because the next person kind of get into the whole conversation about Meier and his interaction with the Pleiadians.
Civilizations. He He also presented many photos to prove it. An auction listing for Meier's original images states, from the 1960s to the early 1980s, Meier took 1,476 photos and 34 films, of which about 600 photos and 9 films were of UFOs. Whether you believe in the authenticity of the 1975 Billy Meier UFO photo or not, there is no denying its place in popular culture. It continues to captivate and mystify people to this day, and is considered one of the most iconic UFO photos in the world.
I cannot argue that point whatsoever with that portion of the video. It is one of the most iconic UFO photos ever taken. Now, it's very divisive because a lot of people immediately cast off Billy Meier as hoaxing his entire encounter. And as we go on through this sort of exploration of Meier's contact with the Pleiadians, you might understand where the skeptics are coming from, because his story is, of all of the UFO and contactee and abduction stories that we have all heard about, his is quite possibly the most fanciful one. And I think that's a lot where the skepticism comes in within his case. But that being said, let's continue with the next stitched video.
This man traveled back in time to the dinosaur era with the help of aliens.
Now, this is where the Meier story gets interesting, because as he got more notoriety, started garnering more attention, his sightings and his contacts seemed to grow, and his story really sort of expanded, if you will, into this huge, almost novella of things that had happened to him, allegedly since he was a little child.
He actually took his camera with him and managed to take this shot of a pterodactyl.
Now, that picture of the pterodactyl is part of the reason that he gets so much flack for making things up. And we're going to go on, or we'll talk more about it. I have a sort of a slideshow of his UFO photos that he has taken, and even some of the movie footage that he took that I'm going to show you here in a little while. But stuff like the pterodactyl and the UFO that you see, people really just look at them and immediately cast aspersions about them being fake. And that's understandable. You hear somebody say they got taken back in time in a UFO to prehistoric Earth and took pictures of dinosaurs. You find that kind of hard to believe. Now, I will say this, a lot of his story kind of steps over each other within his explanation of it. A lot of them, he would state that he would go on the Pleiadians UFOs and go on all these trips. And at one time, he would say that he couldn't take a camera or a video recorder, a Super 8 is what he had, an 8mm film movie camera. And one time he'd say he couldn't take them, couldn't take pictures. Another time, like the pterodactyl and some of the footage you're going to see, he claims that they did let him do it. That's the interesting thing about it.
His name is Billy Meier, a Swiss man who claims he has been in direct contact with aliens since he was just a boy. Apparently, he's one of the few people around the world who is permitted to actually photograph and take videos of UFOs, and has been doing so since the 1960s and 70s. He claims to have captured images such as this and this. He also claims that the beings that have visited him are known as the Plagerians.
That's sort of I think a lot of what goes into sort of the him speaking Swiss and German and the translation between English and Swiss is because sometimes they say Plagiarians, other time they say Palladians. So you're going to hear both of those throughout this entire podcast.
They're allegedly from the star cluster known as the Pleiades. This isn't the first time we've heard of reports of aliens coming from the Pleiades, but his case is interesting altogether, considering that Billy only attended school up until the 6th grade. He asserts that the aliens are about 3,500 years ahead of us technologically and that they study us because we represent an earlier stage of their own evolution.
Now, that's one thing that he has gone on to say as his story has unfolded throughout the decades is that the Palladians or the Plagerians, whichever one you want to say, are distant relatives of us. They look exactly like we do. So kind of reminds you of the 50s contactee movement where everybody was going aboard UFOs and they would always say they're from Venus or Mars or insert random planet in our solar system, and they looked exactly like human beings do.
What's interesting is that he even presented exotic metal samples that represented 4 stages in the construction of the Pleiadian spacecraft.
Now, he did submit some metal that he allegedly got from the Plagerians, and allegedly they did all these scientific tests on them to where most of the time the results came back as mainly aluminum with some inert other metals mixed in. A lot of people took that to think that you couldn't have a metal like that here on Earth, specifically back in the 70s and the 80s, because we couldn't manufacture it or however they described it. But fact of the matter is the metal that he gave to be examined really didn't prove much of anything.
What's even more trippy is that he gave the metal samples to a research scientist at IBM, Dr. Vogel. Dr. Vogel found that everything about the metal samples indicated a cold fusion process, something that to this day hasn't been mastered on Earth.
Like I just said.
We all know that the United States government and governments all around the world are currently studying metamaterials, meaning materials that are not found on Earth. Now, I'm not saying Billy Meier's story is true, but it is pretty interesting. Keep an open mind, and as always, keep it adrenalis.
Now, the thing about the metal sample is interesting because you really can't tell one way or the other what exactly it was because it was just a sort of hunk of metal. And like I said, it was mainly aluminum with some other inert items and the whole cold fusion thing that the content provider said there. I'd never heard that part of it before, but I suppose it could be. I didn't watch the entire or read the entire release from the test that they did, other than the highlighted areas. And in the highlighted areas, I never really saw anything to do with cold fusion or anything like that. Now, Billy Meier, his story is an interesting one because, quite frankly, it's like a movie because the story he spins is kind of hard to believe. When he was younger in his teens, he got into some trouble and ended up going to jail, which is fine. That happens to thousands, if not millions, of people, and they learn their lesson as they serve their time and come out a better person. That possibly could be true about Billy Meier. But allegedly, when he got out of jail, he claims that he sort of became kind of this, I don't know what's the word you want to use, this kind of gun for hire, this super assassin where countries and governments and agencies would hire him to kill people. This is his words. He claims he worked for countries like Iran and Iraq and Turkey and all sorts of countries where they would hire him to be a hired gun. At which point he kind of got notable, according to him, for being one of the best hitmen around. So I know what you're thinking right now. He claims he's a hitman. There's really not any proof that he was ever a hitman. And now he's got this fantastical UFO story. And I get that whole point of why people think that, because it is pretty outstanding, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, because there's no proof. He has no proof behind that. And I suppose if you're a hired hitman, you really are not going to have any proof. But at some point, he got caught, allegedly, and got sent back to jail. And he escaped jail, allegedly, and joined the French Foreign Legion, because apparently that's what you did back then. And after a while in the French Foreign Legion, he realized he didn't really like it there, so he escaped the French Foreign Legion, or went AWOL, or whatever it is they do when you leave them, and he just moved back to Switzerland. At some point during this entire story, he met his wife in Greece, and they got married and had a few kids. And this is kind of into the 70s now, where he started to come out with some of these UFO pictures that I'm going to show you right now. And I know a lot of these pictures look really kind of crazy, and he insists that they are all 100% accurate and factual. But when you look at them, you think to yourself, those are way too clear to be UFOs, and they're all conveniently in frame and everything. I do have a few snippets of the movie footage that he claims to have taken during all of his sightings. And the movie footage, even more so than these still footages that you're seeing, cause the skeptics to say there's no way, because a lot of the movie footage is, well, there's only one way to kind of put it. And let me just, well, I'll put it this way. I'll just play some audio of the UFO that he claims the noise the UFO made. And I know you think that thing went on for like 4 minutes, so I only cut out a few seconds of it. The thing with Billy Meier is interesting. So I think what I want to do is I will just play his movie footage and talk about that as we go on. Now, before I start playing the video, the this is all freely available online if you want to sit down and watch all of this and enjoy it or do your own study on it. You can find it. Internet Archive actually has the raw footage that you can watch on their site or download it to watch. Or you can watch plenty of YouTube and TikTok videos that just sort of show some of the movie footage and talk over it and whatnot. Because in total, it's about 17 minutes long. I don't think I'm going to show you the whole 17 minutes of it, but I think I will show you some of it and comment as we take a look, because most people will look at a lot of this footage and just think, that looks like your prototypical 50s swinging on a string UFO. The believers will tell you that they will see this UFO going behind the tree and even making the tree move. Yeah, you can see it, but you could also say it was windy out that day, and that's why the top of the tree was moving. What do I actually believe within a lot of his video footage? I think it's almost a little too convenient that he was able to capture all of this stuff, because if you go by some of the stories that he says, that they didn't want him to film or take pictures specifically of them or their spacecraft, but then there's other times that they let him do it, like some of the pictures we showed you and some of this video footage. And you saw that skip right there a second ago, and that's where they claim, and I think it's the believers that created us. I don't think I ever heard Billy Meier say that they did that, but the believers are claiming that the UFOs jump from place to place, sort of warping or whatever phrase you want to use. So this type of video, and it's going to switch here in a few minutes to a different setting. He has them in all sorts of different areas, all in and around where he lives in Switzerland. And they all basically look like this video here to differing degrees. There's certain times where he gets a little bit closer, but it's still, you're just seeing an object like this plane. So ultimately, what do I think about the Billy Meier story? And I didn't even really get into the whole depth of it, but I bought a book back in the early mid 1980s about his story. When I first read it, at this time I was still, I believed everything. So I really believed it. And as I got older and started to really kind of logically look at certain things, and if you've watched or listened to this podcast long enough, you have heard me say ad nauseum that about 95% of all UFO sightings have a logical explanation or are misidentified or just flat out hoaxes or made up. It's the 5% that interest me. And I think that's kind of the thing here with Billy Meier. I think maybe he did see something at some point in the 60s and or the 70s, and I think he took it as a case of getting some notoriety because once he publicized that very first picture that we showed you at the beginning, people started coming out in droves to his home, to which at some point there were dozens and dozens of people staying with him and his family in his home in Switzerland, claiming to experience all of these sightings and whatnot, but nobody else other than Billy Meier ever had pictures or movies from their visits to Meier's farm. It's interesting, the story that you really hear, and I should have mentioned earlier that he claims that he knows when he's going to have a contact experience because they telepathically tell him in his head that they're going to come and pick him up, where he puts on a whole show, which was in some of the documentaries you can watch. He puts on brand new clothes, and for whatever reason, he takes his gun with him every single time for, quote, protection, and disappears off on his moped to an undisclosed location, takes a walkie-talkie to let his wife know that it's time for her to come and pick him up because at sometimes they drop him off miles away from his house. Now, a logical person would hear that and say, well, if they're going to let you know they're going to pick you up and you go to this predetermined location, then why wouldn't they drop you off at the same exact spot? And he never really had a good explanation for any of that. As time went on, he still to this day insists that everything is true. And I'm not even getting into a lot of the fantastic stuff like time travel, like you heard in the one video and whatnot, because that is just a little too out there for me. He also had a list of like 20 things where he claims he predicted them way back in the 1950s, and they've all come true, like both wars with Iraq and stuff like that. And I've talked in this podcast about psychics before, how they conveniently claim credit for stuff that they predicted, and other times when they don't come true, they just seem to brush that off and forget about it. So I think that's Billy Meier enjoying his 5 minutes of fame. So ultimately, what do I believe about the case? Well, I kind of said it. I think maybe he saw something back in the 60s and or 70s and thought he would like to get his 5 minutes of fame, and it's almost become sort of a cult now. I'm not saying like a dangerous cult or anything like that, but people flock to him. People that believe his story really, really believe his story, and they will go to their deathbed swearing that everything he says is true. And all of this footage that you're seeing behind me is 100% factual as well. Me, I think he's got a lot of showman in him. And I think his story about being this worldly hitman kind of shows people exactly the mindset of Billy Meier. So do I think he saw a UFO? Quite possibly. Do I really believe his fantastic story about the Plejorans and time travel and having hundreds upon hundreds of contacts with them throughout his entire life? No, I don't. But maybe you think differently, so let me know in the comments what you think about the Billy Meier case. And as usual, I don't have a closer for this podcast. So I'll simply close with, I want to believe.